Hey, everybody. Welcome to a special edition of Santa Barbara Talks with Josh Molina. I have architect Brian Cearnal coming up, and he's going to talk about the big 250-room hotel project, which went before the Planning Commission last week, and it was quite the meeting. And Brian's going to walk us through the whole history, the whole project, and where we're at now with this whole debate of housing versus hotel. And then he's going to talk about the Cumbre Plaza hotel project. He's also the architect there, and he's going to talk about the specific plan discussion and what that housing project will look like someday when, if it gets built. So really great conversation. I wanted to ask you to please consider making a contribution to this podcast, Santa Barbara Talks with Josh Molina. I do this all on my own. It's separate from NewsHawk. It's separate from any of my teaching jobs. It is just me. I do it because I love the community, and I wanted to create a video and audio archive for people to go back in time and look at and learn and remember what was happening with Santa Barbara during this historic period where we're sort of at this moment in time where we're trying to figure out what are we going to make this community look like for the next 100 years. And so I'm talking to everybody who's a part of that conversation, from activists to business owners to elected officials to developers to architects to people who are just involved and have ideas. And this is a really great format. So I appreciate you taking time to support me. Any contribution you make allows me to improve the quality of these podcasts. It allows me to spend more time on these podcasts. It allows me to even be able to come out to you and shoot a podcast live on location with you so that we can be in your scene, your background, your area. And that is really something that I'm doing. I did that with Sunstone Winery, and that was awesome. We went out there, got great photos, great video, did the interview right there at the classic, mansion house that they have there. And that was a lot of fun. So if you make a contribution, that helps me do that. You could also consider sponsoring Santa Barbara Talks. And that's a whole package deal with an interview and, social media and, logo. And, we can have a conversation about your business or your topic. So please consider making a contribution. I really appreciate it. I love what I do. I love podcasting. I love being able to have conversations. And you get to have it with a journalist with 22 years of experience asking good questions and with the history and knowledge of the community. So thank you so much. Let's dive right in. Brian Cearnal, have a great day. Welcome to Santa Barbara Talks with Josh Molina. It's such a pleasure today to be here with one of Santa Barbara's icons, architect Brian Cearnal, who is synonymous with beautiful buildings in Santa Barbara. And we're going to talk about one of his latest projects and what happened at the recent Santa Barbara Planning Commission. But first, I want to welcome Mr. Cearnal, who's very busy and one of my original podcasters when we were just doing it over audio. So I'm very grateful to him. But Brian Cearnal, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well, Josh. Thank you. Happy Monday.
Thank you. Appreciate it. So let's talk about what happened at the Santa Barbara Planning Commission just recently on Thursday. It is a 250-room hotel project at 101 Garden Street. This meeting this item lasted more than 4 hours, and it was one of those very topsy-turvy, all over the place, thinking out loud, exploring kind of meetings about something that has been actually in the works for a long time. So I want to let you talk about it, but I just want to say from the outset, what I was struck by with this discussion was that the Planning Commission was very much trying to go in a direction of housing. And everybody knows we need more housing. That's not an issue. But this developer is in a different sort of place and time with the history of this project and this land. So I'm hoping we can talk a little bit about what's really going on the ground here. And while we want to try to, of course, squeeze developers for as much as we can for housing, this situation is a little bit different. So Brian, what is proposed for 101 Garden Street?
So it is a 250 room hotel, and it's been that since the specific plan was approved back in 1983, and an environmental impact report was done. And prior to that, I don't going way back, Bill Wright, who was the owner of the property, for years pursued the idea of an aquarium on the site across Garden. It was going to be part of that specific plan, but spent a lot of money. That didn't go anywhere, and ultimately ended up with this specific plan that has, sort of sat around in a way for a long time. The Wrights were always looking for partners to be able to do the various pieces of the specific plan. One is the hotel, and yes, it was also assigned a multifamily category at the city's sort of variable density, which is 15 to 27 units to the acre, so not super dense. Catacorner, where the rock pile is, was designated for a 45,000 square foot market. And somewhere, in the after the specific plan in the 90s, Bill Wright donated the land for the connection between Garden Street intersection at 101 and Cabrillo, including also the land where Yananali then connected to that intersection at Garden. And it was 2.5 acres, something like that he ended up giving away to the city, no strings attached, on the assumption that it was all part of realizing this specific plan. So there was a housing project that I know Denny Pikert was involved in, I think around 90 units. I don't know the details of it. I don't know why it didn't go through. I know it went to at least a concept review at the Planning Commission, but basically sat there. And it wasn't until Michael Rosenfeld back in, 2012 maybe, came around and negotiated a lease with the Wrights to build this hotel. And so we were involved in the initial designing of this sort of way back. Maybe it was 2018, but it was a long time ago. And went to Planning Commission conceptually, went to HLC conceptually. Everybody liked the basic concept. Mike Jordan, interestingly, then a planning commissioner, spoke about housing at that concept review and was concerned about it, as has always been. And then Rosenfeld, whatever, he'd built the Californian, he had issues, and he had to give up his arrangement with the Wrights, or at least ended up trading it out with this group called Dauntless, which is Sean, who was at the hearing representing the ownership. And these guys are hotel guys, right? That's what they do, is hotels. And they really like this idea of sort of the middle ground, whether it's a Marriott or whatever, that has these extended stay rooms and has hotel rooms, and they're usually in the middle of the market. So these guys took over the plans, assumed what we had heard from the Planning Commission still stood, and basically spent 1.5 years or more developing the plan so that we could go again to HLC, deal with all the stormwater stuff, which, by the way, probably added 1 year to the process of getting the application accepted, was just dealing with this little remnant drainage ditch that became a wetland along Garden, ironically, as part of the extension of building Garden. So, we're working away kind of thinking, okay, this specific plan, this is what it is. Understand it can't, it makes no sense to mix hotel and housing really from a business standpoint. So we're just plodding away, get the application accepted, finally get a Planning Commission date, and then boom, it's all about housing. And I get it. I completely get it. I couldn't agree more. It is about housing, and this is a remnant. But what do you do? What do you do? You've got a specific plan. These people have spent millions of dollars relying on that. The Wrights have expected a return based on that. And here you go, there we sit. And so I appreciate the discussion, and it's probably good from the standpoint of the Planning Commission pushing that agenda, which is important for this community. But the things they were asking for were kind of nuts. I mean, they wanted us to, give them a report on what the impact of building 250 hotel rooms would have on our housing stock. And that's serious scientific research that you'd have to come up with whatever the algorithms are for what those actual impacts are.
Mm-hmm.
And it would take a long time. So that was very frustrating, kind of dealing with that. At the end of the day, the developer did agree to look at adding some actual little apartments with the hotel. It actually works out. I mean, I was kind of on the fly at the hearing, sort of sketching and thinking about, okay, if we took these like 6 units over here that are next to the closest to Yananali on the ground, you could totally enter them from the parking lot side. And then you build 6 units up higher on the 3rd floor, and you just build a little bit more building, and in the process get the 6 units. And, that's what we're working on right now. And that's, hopefully that kind of, that works. So that's the story.
Brian, how many years has this area? I went over there, took photos, saw the story poles. There are some businesses there. A lot of it seems to be sort of storage. It's a huge piece of land. How long have we had nothing there, so to speak, at that site? How many years?
Well, the 40 years since I've been here, and I don't remember the exact year that the Garden Street extension happened, but prior to that, the Yananali just dead-ended right there where those containers are, and that was all Southern Pacific land. And Calavo had an avocado operation, packing plant right there in some of those buildings that are on the other side of Garden. But this was always a place where people stored boats and, had containers. And it's sort of a remnant of what the waterfront always was. It's why the Funk Zone is so cool, right? This was the industrial hub of Santa Barbara. Everything came in by ship, and therefore you had all these little storage things and whatnot. And this was a remnant of the Southern Pacific land in this area. And Bill Wright's been renting these spaces, these little subdivisions inside that property for years and years. And they've all known. I mean, they from discussions with family, everybody that's renting there knows that they're month to month, and that there is this specific plan, and that someday it's going to go. And I know the intention is to give them, once the project is approved, to give them like 9 months notice, or a year's notice, whatever they need, because the project won't break ground until that point, right? So yeah, and it's a bunch of little people. It's a bunch of little guys.
What's really interesting to me, though, as a journalist, who's somebody who sat through these meetings and covered these meetings, was here you were trying to explain the history, to talk about the specific plan, to talk about the fact that the Wrights donated this extension. And I think you used a number of worth today's dollars, more than $10 million. And you have a commission who is basically saying, or not all of them, but some of them saying, if we told you to build housing, what could you do? What would that do to the project? And so you had Commissioner Wardlow hitting that over and over and over. What can you do? And we heard Sean Gilbert say, if we have to do less than 250 rooms, this deal could fall apart. We know about what's happening with construction financing right now. This is not a great time. And all signs indicate that it's going to get worse. But yet you have this commission saying housing, housing, housing. In that moment, Brian, you tried to bring some clarity. You tried to sort of say, hey, let's stop talking about ideals, and let's just like get to the reality here. Why can't they just let's just build housing? Why can't they just say forget the hotel, let's build housing? And that's what Santa Barbara needs. Talk to people who are just like, we need housing right now. Why can't that happen?
Well, I if the city decided that, you know what, we made a mistake with the specific plan and we want this to be housing. When I look at all the economics, I mean, I don't know the numbers of what a 250 room hotel brings to the Wright family. I know they're leasing the property, but it's a long-term, it's a 99-year lease, and I'm sure it's a lot of money every year for that. And so to make those same numbers work for a residential project means you're starting with a big land cost. And people don't understand that land cost is a direct relation to the cost of the unit. If you get only so many units on the land cost per unit is much higher. Consequently, the cost of the unit is much higher. And that's one of the reasons why we have such a crisis here in Santa Barbara. But what is going to happen? The reality is this developer can't do it. He's not a housing developer, so his deal with the Wrights goes away. Well, what happens then? Naturally, the mind immediately goes to, wow, that's a lawsuit. Right. So I won't say anything more about that because I'm just an architect. I'm not an attorney, but it's likely a mess. And then what? You don't have the density really there. If you took the city's density right now, you could get a little over 100 studio units. If you did one bedrooms, you get about 90 units. Okay, if you did two bedrooms, the density goes down. That's the way the variable density formula works in this part of the city. So, that density is not enough. So then what? Then the Wrights have to find another developer who's willing to take the risk to try to get more units on the site. And then to top it all off, you've got the Coastal Commission who doesn't want housing in the coastal zone. Specifically demands that the coastal zone be visitor serving. That's a bit of a conundrum, isn't it?
Yeah, there were a couple times in that meeting, Brian, where you were a little frustrated, noticeably, and you used the HELL
I
word.
did. I said hell.
You said hell at a planning commission meeting, and so I thought that was interesting when talking about a housing study. But I'm gonna just throw the question out there that was asked of you, which was, how will building 250 hotel rooms affect Santa Barbara's overall affordable housing market in crisis? And your response to that was what?
Well, my response to that is, yeah, I couldn't agree more. I don't like the fact that, this kind of a use, more hires mostly middle wage workers who aren't making a lot of money, certainly aren't making enough money to live in Santa Barbara in a reasonable fashion. A lot of them do, by the way, as we know. A lot of people in the service industry, in the hotel, tourist industry do live here. But it is a dilemma, and the only way I can answer it is certainly the hotel rooms will provide some TOT tax, which ought to be, by the way, designated to housing for this city, as certainly a percentage of it. Certainly, I'm going to guess that the majority of the businesses in the funk zone are going to like the fact that at this anchor location, there's 250 hotel rooms of people that are going to walk into the funk zone and visit those businesses. So I'm guessing the majority of those folks probably like the idea. But no, in the big scheme of things, it's a really hard one because, do you try to put higher density, lower income, moderate income housing in this location, God, it'd be great for the people living there. I mean, one of the things I brought up, Josh, in the hearing was that I did Villa Del Mar, and man, that was a struggle. There was so much opposition to that. Nick Welsh lovingly referred to it as the Yano condos,
Uh-huh.
and for a year we fought to get that project approved because it was a lot of little metal buildings. It had been the Chevrolet dealership. It had been, I think that they made surfboards there. There was all kinds of stuff. Um, and so that now people look at that and go, God, isn't that great? So yeah,
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
great that it is great that there's housing there. Um, probably should have been more dense and more affordable, but that's our market.
Right. What
So I don't, tough one. Tough one.
what are some of the challenges with mixing hotel with housing, just from a, I guess an architectural point of view, but just sort of a living quality of life? We don't see much of that. It's usually one or the other, I guess. But what are some of the challenges where you have people living where people are staying?
Well, the difference between somebody who's staying in an overnight accommodation and their world,
Yeah.
and the fact that somebody's living there, full time. I believe actually this is why I love architecture. I think architecture could solve the problem. I think, as I mentioned to you, I kind of mentioned to you what the solution is that we're working on. I think you can create nice little private entrances for those apartments that don't impact that the hotel residents don't even know it's there, that it just kind of works. And so, I think at a limited scale, if you try to do 60 apartments with the hotel rooms, that's a whole nother thing, right? But
Right.
if you try to get at least some component, some reasonable amount that addresses what the real impact of building that hotel is, I think it's a reasonable, it potentially has a reasonable solution as long as the building can get bigger.
Yeah. Which creates a whole other problem there with, views and size, bulk, and scale and that
Yeah,
whole thing.
yeah. Well, the good thing about this location, though, is you really don't. I mean, when you're on Cabrillo, when you're on the bike path, and you look up Garden, you don't really. Garden Street corridor provides the mountain view from that standpoint, And so I don't. I think the photo sims we did realistically show that it just doesn't have. It's not an issue because the mountain views are always going to be there.
Right. So I want to ask you two things. Bill Wright and the Wright family, the Wright property. Can you spend just a minute or two on who is Bill Wright and who is the Wright family? They're listed as the owners of this property. They have a history in this town, right? This is not some out of town developer coming in wanting to build a hotel room or convert something into hotel rooms. Who is Bill Wright and who is this family that is behind this project?
Well, Bill Wright is deceased. He died not that long ago. Wonderful man, salt of the earth, loved to talk, loved Santa Barbara. He put this property into the El Pueblo Viejo when probably anybody in their right mind would have avoided that.
Yeah.
and and he did it because he loves Santa Barbara and he always believed this was going to be a gateway to the city, and he was very proud of this land, and he worked hard. I mean, Bill Wright came from nothing and he started. I don't know a lot about his early history. I know he developed trailer parks, and I know he did industrial buildings, and for years and years I know he worked with Ed Lindvik doing projects. A smart guy, smart businessman who was just a really good human being, just a decent human being, and loved to tell stories. And his daughter survives him, and her husband Tony Bortolazzo, and he is the um, uh, property manager. He's the guy. He was at the hearing. He's just a good. He also just salt of the earth, good guy. And they're just they're a pretty normal family from that standpoint. You know, they're not ostentatious, not wealthy. I mean, they've got obviously the wealth in that land and other land that Bill had managed to develop and whatnot, but very low key and a good guy. And he loved Monterey architecture, and he wanted nothing more than for a building to be designed in the Monterey style here on this property. So,
and that's where that aquarium idea comes from.
The aquarium came from his wanting to give back, and he just had he also had that vision for a long time. I think it ended up costing so much and kind of getting beat up to where he just gave up on that. But yeah, spent many years pursuing that.
Mm-hmm. So at this meeting, you have the commission talking about, at a minimum, employee housing, look at opening it up, this market, and then they continued it. And so where are you at now? What exactly is the development team? What are you trying to do here when you bring this back to the planning commission? What can you do?
Well, I already mentioned, we're going to try and put units, actual apartment units into the hotel. And there's, they asked for us to outreach. And so the owner's going to try to outreach the, Funk Zone community and neighborhoods. I think as far as talking about the tenants who are there, I think the key to that is that these businesses get long-term notice. They'll have a full 9 months or a year to know when they have to be out. And that's really important. So that's what I think that we're going to offer up, and the planning commission then has to decide, is that enough? And if not, I don't think there's any question, Josh, at that point. If they can't approve it, then it probably ends up at council on an appeal.
Yeah. So then they'll deny it, and then it goes to the city council, and the discussion is up or down at that point, right?
Yeah.
And do you have any thoughts? Do you think after that meeting there's enough understanding from the commissioners that, okay, we're not going to try to make this a housing project only now? Do you think you made some progress, or are you unsure about the outcome?
I'm unsure about the outcome. I mean, it was interesting to have Sheila Lodge be one of the ones on the commission that actually did talk about, how difficult this was and the commitments that had been made. So I don't know. John Bouchy was missing from that hearing, and if he were there, he'd be a significant vote. But I could see some of the planning commissioners, based on what I heard, vote against the project just on the principle that it's not what the city needs, and they can't make the findings.
Right. So it's interesting, Brian, because, you are obviously, if you're a developer and you're looking to a go-to person, and there are many good developers in town, but hiring you is a smart way to do it because you've got this history and you kind of know what they want. And so you're in this space and time with this project, which dates back to the 80s with that specific plan. But it's just so interesting because you're also involved with a current specific plan conversation with La Cumbre Plaza and the Taylor project, and what is it, 695 units or something like that for half of the
probably not that. Yeah, probably not that many. Probably 650, 660.
Yeah,
something like that. Yeah, a lot of units.
And so you're the architect for this project would sort of front State Street on that side of La Cumbre Plaza a little bit. I think that's Hope over there. And we know that the city was over there trying to get a specific plan, kind of bring all the developers, have a holistic development, because the other family who owns the other half, they're working with a housing developer, and they're sort of worried about losing control of this. What's going on with La Cumbre Plaza? I've talked to the developers, I've talked to the city, I've talked to a whole bunch of people. I've not talked to you. Where do you stand on this whole, housing project taking over La Cumbre?
Well, first and foremost, I believe that the Cumbre Plaza should be housing for decades. That hole in the ground on State Street at Macy's is ridiculous. How it even ended up that way, I have no idea. Rumor is that Robinson's May wanted a 3-story presence, but the city wouldn't allow them to go that high, and so they dug the hole to create the 3-story presence along. Whether that's true or not, I do not know. But it needs to be housing. It absolutely needs to be housing, and it's so interesting to me, the history of how La Cumbre Plaza came around in '67. And it was the ultimate expression of sprawl, right, at that time, and it was disastrous for downtown. And in fact, that's what initiated the redevelopment agency and the building of parking structures downtown and all of that. And so here we are now, full circle, going back to the idea that should be housing, and clearly it should be higher density housing for just the reasons we were talking about earlier, that if you take the cost per acre and you try to create truly affordable units, then you've got to have more density to do that. We are pursuing state bonus density as part of that project. And this is a whole fascinating layer that I don't think that many people understand, but we're going to see more and more projects that utilize state law to increase their density. Very simply, if you take a certain percentage of your base units allowed, and in the case of La Cumbre Plaza, they're allowed 63 units to an acre. You take that base density and you provide, say, X number, 10% of those units as affordable, then you can get an increase of bonus density over your base density of 24% or something, and it's kind of a sliding scale, but it's very interesting. And in the process of using that state law and creating these low or very low income units, you can ask for certain incentives, concessions, waivers of things like parking standards, setbacks, open space, maybe even height. So I feel strongly, and this was a struggle for me, I have to say, to begin with. A little bit of a tangent here, but the city charter, the 60-foot height limit, has always been this sacred thing. And I fought against it being changed from 60 feet to 40 feet back in the 90s, because I didn't think it was the right thing. To truly be a sustainable community, you got to go up. I hate to say it, but it's the truth. You reduce your footprint and you build up. The Cumbre Plaza is a perfect opportunity to build higher than 60 feet. And if in fact you are able to do that, you can create variation in the architecture, which then is going to be a better project in the long run for the city. So we're working on a piece of land that's about a little over 8 acres, and that is, that's about a little less than a block and a half. So really, just think of it: the corner of State and Hope as a city block. Yeah. In downtown Santa Barbara. So that would be like from Macy's to the Balboa building, for instance. Take the Paseo Nuevo or whatever block you want. It's a city block, and we are approaching it like it's a city block with different buildings and paseos and trying to create variation in the architecture. And that's exciting. That's a real opportunity. I'm proud to be part of that. Now, the specific plan question, which we were talking about earlier, the city wanted a specific plan, and I will tell you that the Taylors, in the very early stages of discussions, a couple of years ago with the Taylors about this, and with the Riviera Dairy folks who own the Sears side, did not want a specific plan, because the specific plan traditionally takes a long time. The Wright specific plan, the Cabrillo Plaza specific plan, took 4 years. And what the Taylors wanted was a clear path to be able to develop this once Macy's lease is up and they are free to be able to build on the site. So they also felt that a specific plan is typically used to rezone property. When the zoning exists for what you want to do there, i.e. housing, why do you need a specific plan? Okay, so I get the idea that, well, it's 30 acres, really ought to be master planned. We need to sort of figure it out. I respect that, but I don't think that takes 4 years. I think that can be done in a couple of months by just looking at some basics. For instance, La Cumbre Lane, that little connector that connects to Five Points, right there where that AT&T store is, a gas station, goes through. That ought to connect to Hope. There ought to be a connection there because it's a big enough parcel. I was using the block analogy before, right? If you got a 500 by 500 as a city block, La Cumbre Plaza ought to sort of be thought about in that terms, that it's broken down from an urban plan. So that happens, right? We're proposing a right-hand turn lane on La Cumbre, which needs to happen just from a circulation, because State Street is what I meant. State Street right-hand turn lane onto Hope, because it gets really clogged right there, and it's sort of a nuisance. I think that the market is going to be there for a long time, and I think it's inevitable that there is a more consolidated, condensed little neighborhood center around that market. Not a La Cumbre Plaza mall, but maybe little stores that surround a parking lot in the middle, maybe with some open space. And that's the core of the project. And then all around it, on the creek side, on the State Street side, on the freeway side, it's housing with maybe some mixed use, retail. I mean, one of the things that we're studying is how do you create some really interesting retail that is connected to State Street, that has some open space, that can be kind of vital, life-giving function to this mixed use kind of project. So we are looking at that, but that's to me the master plan. The creek, you create a setback along the creek so that that's kind of a linear park. That's another aspect of a specific plan. Doesn't take 4 years to do that, and I do think the Taylors and what we're trying to do are being very respectful about what will want to happen as it evolves towards the Riviera Dairy site. So that's what we're doing.
That's great. I appreciate all that, like history and sort of vision of what it could be. You mentioned the city height limit, 60 feet. This is one of the core issues. I think that this project is more than 80 feet at its highest point, 82 feet, 84 feet. City charter says anything above 60 has to go to the people. State law, SB 330 says, it doesn't, I guess, address that at all. So, Brian, how can we build this project if it goes to 84 feet in height?
Well, first of all, the SB 330 is really a expediting, law. And it doesn't have anything to do with this height issue. The height issue really is in the utilization of state bonus density to build more affordable units, which gives you the ability to have these concessions, or waivers. It's a legal question, and there is no question that the city so far to us, to the Taylors, and the Taylors have said, we have to respect our height limit, the charter. And so you're kind of dead on arrival with going over 60 feet. So where that will go, I don't know. A lot of minds smarter than me believe strongly that state law trumps, for lack of a better word, the city charter. And that would have to be fought apparently in court. The question is, can the city say, you know what, if you're using state bonus density and you're asking for that kind of a height waiver, then we really can't, our charter is subservient to the state law and we really can't do anything about it. That is, that may or may not be a valid approach. I do think this, as I was alluding to, that the higher buildings towards the back, that bell tower at Macy's is something like 92 feet. And I don't think, by the way, I don't think we're going, I think the latest is maybe 6 stories, that's like the Balboa building, 72 feet above grade. Or above the sidewalk, by the way, because I have to, that's another problem with the property, is the city laws make me measure from grade. So I have to measure height from the bottom of that pit along State Street. So that's another complication. But I believe that keeping the scale of the buildings consistent with what State Street is in character, or at least in, harmonious with that along State, will allow for taller buildings to be in back, well off of State, that actually create a much more interesting architectural solution and a better urban planning solution.
You bring up a good point. That big empty bowl that's there that nobody parks at, it's where the pumpkins are and the Christmas trees are, and it's just kind of random people camping out there. Would that be raised? Would the development be like down there? Or, I know these are not architectural terms that I'm using here, but what happens with that hole?
We're putting parking there.
That's where
we're using the hole to create underground parking. Yeah. So it kind of makes sense, right? Yeah. So the new buildings will all sit in a relationship to the sidewalks along State and Hope.
Yeah. Okay.
And that will be, and there's actually, it's kind of interesting. There's a lot of, there's variation, natural variation that we're having to design in, because State Street, it actually descends towards La Cumbre. And then it also, Hope Street descends as it goes towards Calle Real. And so those grade differences are resulting in us having to look at different building bases in relationship to the sidewalk and having them address the street. And that's actually a good thing. That's creating some interest and whatnot.
Yeah. And then just 2 more things before we wrap up. The other side, you referenced Riviera Dairy, and I've heard they're working with an Arizona real estate developer. I don't know if that's still going on, but do you know anything about the status of that project? I know you're not speaking on behalf of them, but what have you heard about the other half of La Cumbre Plaza?
No, only, I will tell you the Taylors and the Riviera Dairy folks did, spend a lot of time talking about how they might be able to join forces and work together. Ultimately, that didn't happen for any number of reasons. They're obviously, the Riviera Dairy group is a family with a lot of varied interests. So I do think that they at least have some kind of letter of intent with a developer that I think is based in Arizona, but maybe have offices here in Orange County. And I know they've got some issues. It's not a secret that there is a potential earthquake fault that runs through the middle of that property. And so I know, are having to study that to determine whether it's still an active or a potentially active fault. Let's hope not, because it goes right through some buildings at La Cumbre Plaza.
Yeah.
So, likelihood is it's an inactive fault, but they've got to test it and determine that, with experts. And I think that's kind of what's going on right now over there as they're figuring things out.
Okay. And then just lastly, just kind of a question at you, Brian. Here you are representing these private developers, but when the city wants to build a police station, who do they go to? They go to Brian Cearnal. So, you're in just this amazing situation where everybody sort of wants you, even the city, even the same organization that you are trying to get approvals from. Can you just talk a little bit about, what's that like when you're over here on one hand calling the city out for, maybe some inconsistencies in some direction, but on the other hand, you're representing the city, trying to get a police station built. What's it like to be Brian Cearnal when you're so involved with so
Well, look,
much?
first of all, I'm very lucky. I love to do what I do, and every project is unique. And I am so lucky to be able to have the range of projects that I've been able to do over the years. And so, each one is special. And people may not believe this, but I don't really have a hard time compartmentalizing the projects because they are unique. They have, those clients are just as important as anybody else, and we all work hard, and our firm really does work like a collective. I mean, we call it the collective, but I've got some amazing partners. Jeff Hornbuckle is my partner who's in charge of the police station, and that's pretty much his full-time effort. And it's exciting. I'm really excited about the opportunity to create a new place for the police department where the architecture, the building can actually begin to help make social change within the community to make it more inclusive and a better police force. So that's so exciting, and creating housing is kind of my passion, frankly. It's not, believe it or not, hotel rooms, but sometimes, I mean, in the case of the hotel, coming back full circle to that, I mean, that was really my relationship with Bill Wright
Yeah.
that got me into that. And, I love the man. So yeah, I've been doing it for 40 years, Josh. I am trying to find balance in my life. Sometimes I'm a little too busy, but I do take time with my grandkids and my family. And like as I said, I'm lucky. I'm so lucky to be able to see buildings built that I can remember were just a vision in my head, and to know that they will outlive me is just awesome.
Yeah. Well said. And obviously, Santa Barbara's lucky to have you as well because you care about every project that you are involved in, and it shows. So, as anyone who wants to watch
Thank
the
you,
Planning
Josh.
Commission meeting, you could see you caring very publicly about everything you do. But thanks a lot, Brian, for your time, and I really appreciate it. Good luck.
Thank you, Josh. I enjoyed it. Appreciate it. Bye.
Bye.